And we're back. Okay, so since you last left us, there are actually two ways to do particle fluid. I mean, taking the points and meshing them. The one by default that Houdini does is this new one with attribute transfer, and um, basically the magic is in VDB from particle fluid, and then it converts it. And there's a lot of great things with that. There's another one called particle fluid surface, which I'm going to throw down just to show you. It's the old way, but there are times when it's kind of useful too and kind of neat. In this case, I'm actually going to go with this one, the default one, because you see that is the meshing, where they take the points and then they mesh them. The other way to do it is particle fluid surface and mess around with its various variables, which sometimes can actually give you, because they have filtering up here, can actually give you a kind of a neat look. And I've actually sometimes gone with that instead of this, but que sera, sera. By the way, this by default they give you, I just delete that because it bugs me. Render, I'm going to make that black. Let's just look at the points for a second. We're actually not going to go with that. So let's take a look at what we've got. As we saw before we left for the break, there's how it falls, and it moves, and it's there, and you got a couple little guys that sit there, which is kind of neat. So this is going to be our paint for our paint splash, and that's actually pretty cool. I told you it was going to be neat. So let's take a look at what it looks like meshed. I've already sat there and run through the meshing, so we actually get to watch it in quasi-real time. Let's see, we hit the real time button. And yeah, leave stuff before. Okay, so now it's time to do the magic. As you can see, everything's made of mercury. Leaves no trail, leaves no trace. And literally looks like mercury with a meniscus and everything. So what we want to do is the trick I explained before. Now, I want to keep where points on this guy have been near points on that guy. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make something that you won't see rendered, but let's throw down a merge. And I'm going to say I want something that's as close to, here's what's interesting about this. We want to have points that are there, but we also want to have points that might not be in the mesh, like sometimes the mesh, there'll be points outside of the mesh or points near it. So I'm actually going to merge both of the mesh points before they get meshed and the post mesh points, and I'm going to use that so we kind of have our most points we can get kind of thing. Just because when I screw around with this, it seems to work better. I'm going to call that all fluid for like all the points that have to do with the fluid. Don't worry that it gives an error there. It's just saying it's a mismatch of attributes. Is that a word? I'm going to make that black. So that's our points, okay? So now the question is, what do we do with this guy? That's interesting. I don't even know who made that. Makes that by default, I guess. What we're going to do is we're going to scatter a set of points on him. And the points are basically going to be what we use to make what I'm going to call the, geez, I don't even know how to call it. Let's call it the wet map points maker. Does that sound good? Yeah, let's make that. And let's just make a blank geo for a second. And let's say that geo is called the grid. And I'm going to call this, normally we'd have a wet map, so this will be a wet map points maker. And inside of here, I'll give this a funky color just so we know that we're not rendering it, but it's something we're going to use. We're still just going to render this guy and this guy, remember. And when I say this guy, I mean the actual rendered goop. So we can do our control blop there if you want. Sorry, not control alt. That guy, whatever you call that button. It's the control. So that's what we're actually going to render, but we need to make this magic set of points I said we're going to use on our shader. So first we're going to scatter points along it. So let's go ahead and we can kill that guy. Let's go ahead and do an object merge. Let's bring in the, I'm going to call this character just because in the future it's going to be something else. Like it'll be a zombie or it'll be a tube or whatever. So the character is going to be, in this case, coming from a grid, right? And now you see why I call that out, so it's always easy to grab, and I always put capital letters so it's at the top. That is a nifty trick for you, just so we've always got that. So that's our character, right? And what we're going to do, I'm going to make it, again, I do a lot of colors. So we're going to put down a scatter. Now, the density at which we scatter kind of decides a lot of things. So it's kind of an important parameter, I guess I'd call it. So let's do it. Oops, sorry. Let's go ahead and I'm going to call it scatter by density. I'm going to actually not force the total count and have it be by a density scale. So if we change the size of this, we change the number of it. But let's talk a little bit about parameters. The big number on this whole thing was, and I'm going to, let's see how to explain this. We're going to put this in, you've probably done this before. When you do these guys, there's a magic number, and it's this, particle separation, okay? 0.1, and that's where he decides how dense your particles are at the very beginning and how high res this whole sim is. It's used here, and then they also link it in without telling you, by the way, which bugs me, somewhere in here, there, and sometimes even in other places too. So it's a useful thing, and it's going to be the first parameter that we're going to add. So let's go ahead and add that. I'm going to call it particle separation. Actually, I'll call it particle sep, because I don't think it'll actually hold the whole word separation. Particle sep. Okay, and by default we'll make it 0.1, fine. Make that, and then I'm also going to make another one for scattered density. By default be 3000. And let's call that scatter density. Scatter density. Okay. So this particle, first place, what number did I actually use? I don't remember. Oh, it actually was 0.1. Look at that. Okay, so I'm going to basically just copy this guy, and I'm going to paste a reference to him every place he's actually needed. In other words, I'm going to paste a reference there. Wait for the big pause. And paste a reference here. And right now you're wondering, why did he even bother doing this? And the answer is that magic number is going to come up later in when we make our shader. It's basically going to tell us how far away we need to look from each point to find something interesting. Okay, our other thing is our scatter density, which I said to 3000, which sounds good. Let's hope it is a good one. I'm going to paste a copied reference here. Kerblam. This will be a little slow because it's a lot, but we need a lot of points because we want to make it basically capture every movement of the fluid as it goes along the surface. So don't freak out. It looks like it's a lot. Let's look at it by itself. It looks like it's a lot, but you can see when you get into here, when you're actually in shader space, it's not that much. The other thing to remember is we're going to keep the guys where they actually got wet and they have some information. So we'll end up deleting all the guys that never actually touched any water. Okay. So for each of these guys, we're going to have an attribute. So we're going to create an attribute. Attribute create. Man, time flies. I'm having fun. I'm going to attribute create, and we're going to call this attribute wetness. Wetness. And initially everybody's 0 wetness. Let's say this is initial wetness. Okay. Now over here, let's merge in our fluid. Remember, we're going to actually grab our all fluid points. So from, we call it everything, this is why we call things cleverly, grid fluid, all fluid. So this is our all fluid, and I'm merging it in, so, geez Louise, I can't even spell. So it's that. We're coming up on the 10-minute mark, so you're going to have to forgive me. I'm going to take just a few extra seconds here, and I'll tell you why. This is our initial wetness, right? This is the thing that sets the wetness, and it's 0. Over here, this will be full wetness, because this is the actual water, or paint, or whatever our fluid is. So I'm going to say it's full wetness, and it's the same thing. I'm still calling it wetness. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a variable called wetness, right? Personally, I think when you make this, it should do that by default. that's our thing. We're done 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop here. But the difference is this guy, bum, 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 1. These guys are wet. These guys are dry. So now our question is, I forgot to even do with some colors here. I know we're going over time. 2 seconds. This guy will have, one guy will be blue, and the other guy will be red. Blue. And then the other guy will be red. And we're going to transfer the red to the blue. But we're going to do it so it keeps it over time. By the way, when you do colors like this, always a good idea to actually color them the name of whatever the color is. Okay, so this is going to be great, and the magic happens in the next lesson.